So tonight we have a speaker on Skype, as you can see. This is Dave Rapaport. Hello, everybody. Can you hear them?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. We've set up a microphone, so hopefully you'll be able to hear questions. But we'll just can someone, Josh, can you just kind of test it out? Ask Dave a question. Ask him where he is.
Yeah, I was there. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, clap and touch. Can you hear me?
All right. Okay, good. This is great. All right, so I met Dave through Cheryl a few weeks ago. We almost had a sandwich in Central Park, but Dave's maybe you all saw the interviews that we posted on Lore or the information we posted on Lore. But he's the VP of Earth and Community Care at Aveda. So Dave, just for your information, you're bringing a new perspective into the room for us tonight, which is the corporate story. You know, how to do the kind of work we all want to be doing within a corporate structure. So I'm going to be asking Dave questions tonight. This is going to be a little bit more of an interview. And so I've got a set of questions prepared for him that should just take us through. Dave, I thought we'd start with what you're doing now and a little bit about your role at Aveda. And then I definitely want to talk about how you got there and talk a little bit about your experience and your background. And then we'll end with I have some questions that are designed to pull the wisdom, all of the wisdom that you hold out for us here. So that's sort of the format of the interview that I'll be doing, and then I'll open it up to you guys for any questions. If you have a pressing question in the meantime, raise your hand, obviously, and we can interject it. But we'll go ahead and get started. So, Dave, thank you so much for being here with us.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. This is my first Skype interview in front of a large group of people. You?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done one before. I've done job interviews on both sides of the fence on Skype, but I've never actually done this kind of thing.
Oh, how cool. Okay, great. Well, then they're more experienced than us because you guys have done this before, right? Yeah, okay, good. So we're just going to wallow through and they're going to laugh at us when we make mistakes. So if you could just describe, you've got one of the greatest titles. It's so warm, your title, VP of Earth and Community Care. Maybe just describe what you do at Aveda.
Sure. Well, the title comes from Aveda's mission statement, which is basically about caring for the world we live in, and certainly extends throughout our delivery of products to our guests and the care that's delivered to them in the salons that carry our products. Mm-hmm. We were founded by, of course, Ripple many years ago now, decades, and he always had this vision of providing care and trying to be a leader in environmental responsibility. It was actually only relatively recently that my predecessor added the community care to the title. Mm-hmm. So not just environmental care, but earth and community care. And like I said, it really just reflects our broad desire to care for everybody and benefit everybody who touches our products, from all the way up from where we source ingredients, way up the supply chain, all the way through the steps we take in manufacturing, our presence in various communities that we're in, either in processing or manufacturing, or where our products are sold. And so my role, these roles in what are broadly termed social responsibility or sustainability, tend to be kind of interesting because you sort of touch all aspects of the business. But you generally have this broad responsibility, but very little direct authority over anything. And in a company like Aveda, it's particularly interesting because sustainability is so deeply embedded across all the different functions in the company. So what I do in my role is really more to ensure, and my team, I have a small team, there's 4 of us, is really to provide leadership in ensuring that we continue to create this authentic story in what we do, and we do that partnering across the company, and then we partner across other aspects of the company to enlist all of our various stakeholders, and that includes our employees, our other members of our salon network, the stylists, and their guests, and all of the other partners and folks who have a stake in what we do, which I would include the planet in, as well as our communities. So I'm trying to narrow in on actually answering the question as to what I do. So it's a broad range of things, and one of the things that's taking up a lot of my thought right now is what does Aveda do now, this many years into it, to maintain that leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're thinking a lot now about what that means. What are the new goals that we have to have in place? How do we ensure that we're really trying to pursue game-changing solutions? We did a lot of things that were really unique and new, and the world, has caught up in some respects, and so we need to keep on innovating. So we're not the source of all the innovation by any stretch in the company, but it's my job to try to keep plotting that conversation and ensuring that our R&D department, our sourcing department, our product development folks, and everybody is really thinking about that. So that's one thing that we do. Another thing that is a focus for our department at the moment is supercharging the engagement. Our employees have been always engaged in various ways over the years, but how do we increasingly deepen that engagement, deepen the engagement of the stylists in our network? That's something perhaps we can spend a little time on eventually in the conversation. Stylists have a very intimate relationship with their guests, and our stylists have always been involved in working in their communities for various causes they believed in, and currently they work with partners during what we call Earth Month, April, to raise money for water protection projects around the world. A major focus of that is these communities we source in. But how can we even engage them more fully? Because of that relationship that stylists have with their guests, they can really be agents of our mission and enlist their guests in being change agents in their own right. So, how can we do even more with that is another area of real interest for us.
Let me just ask you something, about how big is that stylist network?
So we have about 6,500 salons in North America. And when I say we have, we only own two, and they're both actually in Manhattan. So they're all independently owned, and depending on their level of commitment and exclusivity, you may see them with branding of Aveda on the outside of the salon. Many also carry other products in addition to ours. We have about 107 stores, we call them experience centers, around the world, and we have about 60 training institutes, Aveda institutes, where stylists are trained. So that's our network, and there's probably on the order of 75,000 or more employees of all these different network members that we consider our tribe.
Great. You made me think of something Raj Sisodia, the co-author of the John Mackey's Conscious Capitalism book, said when I heard him speak once. He talked about how right at the moment a lot of brands are trying to educate consumers, but you can't educate them until you have their trust. And it feels like, you and I have talked about your stylist network, that there's a really nice level of trust that a lot of people have in that relationship that you've got going for you.
Yeah, it's really pretty interesting. I'm about to experience it firsthand. I don't know whether people saw in the introduction materials, but I'm pretty new to Aveda. I just started actually on Earth Day in April.
Was that planned?
It was totally coincidental. I just looked at the calendar and said, I can make it out there by this Monday. And I went, it's Earth Day.
That's like Thomas Jefferson dying on the 4th of July. Sorry.
But we have every 2 years what is called the Aveda Congress, where roughly 5,000 of our members of our tribe come to Minneapolis, and they, deepen their knowledge about styling and coloring, and they learn about our mission and do all kinds of things. So apparently, it's a really revved up crowd who are just incredibly enthusiastic about being part of Aveda. Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the sort of secrets, I guess, to our business success. People choose to be part of that network because they really have an affinity for this mission. There's lots of different, companies, manufacturers that a salon or a spa can affiliate themselves with. And, one of the key reasons why they choose us is because they really love the mission. Now, these are, not necessarily people who are deeply steeped in sustainability or wanting to make change in the world, but, there's something about it that is meaningful to them. And so there's an educational process involved, continuing education, as we all have, but also, efforts to deepen their involvement and engagement.
That's great. And maybe tell us a little bit about the culture of Aveda. You're relatively new there. What did you find? Because you were coming, I know you were at 7th generation, and then there was some work in between there and Aveda. But when you came into Aveda, what kind of a culture exists there at the company?
Well, it's a really how do I describe it? It's enthusiastic. I was really impressed with the extent to which everybody across the company has this sort of deep relationship with the brand and what it stands for, and certainly with the mission. We actually start a lot of our meetings, almost all the big ones, by standing up and reciting the mission.
No, really?
Yeah.
I love that kind of information.
And we also actually start a lot of meetings with a moment of wellness. Somebody will be designated beforehand to just do like this little mini yoga thing or breathing exercise or just a moment of meditation. And actually, we still have one of the founders, along with Horst, he actually founded Aveda after going to India to study with a Swami, and one of his students was sent with him back to the U.S. to help start it. He's still actually employed by the company. And so he'll often be there at big, meaningful gatherings to sort of lead us in this moment of wellness. And so the whole, this notion about caring kind of lives and breathes. It's very real. And the folks who do packaging, they're really focused on maximizing the recyclability of packaging and the recycled content in the packaging. And, will not let the product development people go forward with a plan if it, for some reason, necessitates some kind of packaging, or they think it does, that is not, what they want to do. And likewise across the business, there's people who really, by and large, live and breathe it. And, there's obviously always people who, it's a job, but it's a job that's really meaningful to folks. And so it's been a fun experience, and certainly every bit as engaged as anywhere else I've worked, and that includes, in the nonprofit sector.
That's great. A real passion, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely, and even there's it's a business environment, and there's all kinds of deadlines and pressures. But even within that, the mission is very deeply embedded and felt by people.
That's great. That's oftentimes what I'm coming in to fix. It's like so many companies have these missions that are really just, I don't know what you would call it. They're up on the wall. No one could recite it, let alone recite it at the beginning of any meeting. So it's nice to hear that when it works, it really works to hold the culture together.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to say that it's perfect. There's a lot more that we can do, and we're launching some programs this year to deepen the engagement and drive behavior, both in people's personal lives as well as in their roles in the company. Certainly a lot, that we can and should be doing in that regard. But it's a pretty good situation.
So tell me about a couple, or maybe one or two of the projects that are upcoming or already launched that you're excited about or feel good we saw somebody posted on our intranet a link to the Full Circle Recycling press release, I think it was. But
Yeah.
any project you want to talk about that you think might be of interest to the classes?
Well, there's any number of them, and stop me if we can go on to others. But just the Full Circle example, really is a pretty early stage attempt to try to take what is commonly known as extended producer responsibility. It's our belief that all manufacturers ought to be responsible for whatever they put out in the planet. And one of the things we do is we adhere to this approach that's called cradle to cradle, where what we're trying to do is ensure that everything we use either comes from the ecosystem, the biosphere, and the biological nutrients that get ultimately returned back to the earth, or in the cradle jargon, what are known as technical nutrients, materials that are synthetic but can be recycled, and in also a continuous loop that sort of mimics the natural one. So that's sort of our approach. But even beyond that, we certainly believe that manufacturers have a responsibility to ensure that what they're putting out there in the world is not causing any problems, and we believe ought to be causing creating benefits. So most, as I mentioned, we've gone a great effort to ensure that most of our packaging is highly recyclable, and that means carefully selecting materials that are easily recycled as one of the criteria. But there are components of packaging and certain types of packaging which we haven't been able to do that. They include things like multi-layered laminates in some of our tubes. Because of compatibility with the products that are in them, we can't just make them one material that's easily recyclable. The hair color that is used in salons has to be in aluminum tubes. Pumps, spray heads, multi-material items that are not accepted widely or if at all in recycling programs. So the Full Circle program is an attempt to provide an opportunity for our guests to be able to return those kinds of packaging and components that they can't easily recycle at curbside back to us. And we're partnered with a group called G2 Revolution that works to find recycling opportunities for all of those materials. And they're continually sort of figuring out what else can be done with them and what kinds of markets can be created for them. It's a small program. It's only in our 107 company-owned stores because it's frankly too expensive to be able to roll out across this network of 6,500 salons and spas in North America, because the stuff is shipped via UPS. It's not what I would call the long-term solution, but it's an early stage effort to try to take that kind of responsibility. And these are complicated problems that we can't necessarily solve all by ourselves, but we do have a duty to do what we can and to try to do things that can inspire further action. So that's an example of that. Another example I'd point to is I mentioned trying to have benefits way up in the supply chain. And I don't know if any of the folks in class have looked at any life cycle analysis of personal care or household care products, but typically the largest set of impacts are way upstream, and particularly when you're using plant-based materials as we do, when those materials are being grown. We're talking about agriculture, and there are all kinds of ways that conventional agriculture, as we know, is really harmful. There are all kinds of ways to improve that to the point where it can be providing ultimately benefits for the land and for those communities. So with a relatively new product that's been very successful for us called Embati, is a line of products that are solutions for thinning hair. And they rely on turmeric. It's an Ayurvedic-based formulation in which turmeric is one of the main active ingredients. And so we sought out an organic supplier in India. But beyond that, worked with them to improve their business practices to ensure that they really were providing us with a sustainable product that was creating benefits in the communities to those workers. And then we raise money each year during Earth Month, I guess as I mentioned, for water-related projects. So we took some of that money and funded water projects in the community. That's an example of the kind of thing that we're doing in more and more of these sourcing relationships. What I'm really excited about is the opportunity to really take a look at that end of our product life cycle, and not just say, how can we do a nice water project, but how can we say that is a piece of our responsibility as a component of our product life cycle. And just like we work in Blaine, where we manufacture most of our products, to be as energy efficient as we can, to be as water efficient as we can, to conserve water, to recycle absolutely as much as we can, and minimize waste, and all of the things that we do to try to minimize and have beneficial impact. How would we look at that piece of our life cycle and do that? So could we, for example, work with the farmers that grow materials that end up in our products to sequester carbon, so that we're actually, not having a net adverse impact of carbon there, but actually taking carbon out of the air and putting it in the soil, which is, I think, a vastly untapped opportunity to be a component of the solution to climate change. That at this stage is something we're just beginning to work on, but that's been a continual process to deepen those kinds of relationships and have greater benefits.
That's great.
So I don't know, I could go on, there's lots of other things, but we can probably get to a lot of that in the questions.
Yeah, I think so. I want to just get a little bit of your journey or your background and sort of how you got to Aveda. My impression is that you've been thinking about these things, these questions, for a long time. Maybe you could tell us, what first sparked your interest in doing work like you're doing?
Well, I guess it's probably useful to talk about that my journey. It can seem kind of eclectic at first glance, but to me, it's really been a very clear trajectory. I started out after school, with this kind of altruistic attitude of wanting to be an environmentalist and save the planet. And
wait, can you? Because without you don't have to tell us your age, but can you give me roughly when this was? I mean, it's interesting and useful in terms of the whole environmental movement.
I don't tell you my age. I graduated from college in 1981.
Okay, so this is like early 80s, and you're thinking along these lines.
Yeah, I just was one of these oddballs that started doing that even before then.
That's great.
And I didn't, and I just happened into an environmental biology course and decided, if I'm really serious, this is the most important problem. This is what I ought to work on. And so I had 20 years working for environmental nonprofits, including 13 years or so working for Greenpeace. And that, when you want to talk about social innovation, I think that was really great schooling for me in that. We didn't, I don't know the phrase had been coined then, we certainly didn't know it. But we found ourselves as the inheritors of a significant part of the stream of what was maybe the greatest social innovation of the 20th century, nonviolent direct action. And bearing witness, certainly among them, right, in terms of making change. And we were able to sort of really refine that craft and use it to do things that, I think were pretty significant. You never know it at the time.
Can you?
For example,
you were just saying, for example, because I was going to say, I love this idea of bearing witness, and I think about that a lot with regard to the Occupy movement, even, especially when people say they're not doing anything. But maybe I'd never thought about Greenpeace being, part of that heritage, that lineage.
Perhaps very, very much so. It started when a bunch of people got an old fishing boat and went to the Aleutian Islands off of Alaska to try to be in the zone of a planned nuclear bomb test that the U.S. was doing on the island of Anchitka, and try to stop it by being in the zone, or at least bear witness to it. And people know about all the sort of whaling actions where they were trying to get in between the harpoons and the whales, that act of being there, bearing witness, was really important because it was so inspirational to people. And what we ended up being good at was finding ways to at least symbolically, bear witness, put yourself between the harpoon and the whale in various ways on different kinds of issues, and create an image that not only underscored what the problem was, but really inspired people by the fact that somebody could do something and take action. If those crazy people could go out there in that boat or do that, maybe there's something that I can do. And what we found ourselves a role at being was catalyst.
Yeah.
And one example that and you never know at the time, what your impact is going to be, and then you can spend a lot of years actually thinking that you didn't have any. But one of the things that I was involved in is I led a series of actions down in New Jersey in Toms River at what was a Ciba-Geigy chemical plant. Ciba-Geigy is now a Novartis, but it was the last remaining direct industrial discharge in the Atlantic Ocean. And to make a long story short, we went down and figured out how we would try to actually plug that pipe, and a whole series of things which actually lasted over several years, and inspired local people to take action. And it turned out actually the major problem they had with groundwater pollution from all those stuff they were dumping that wasn't making it into the pipe or before the pipe was built, that snowballed into all kinds of things, which eventually closed the plant, closed the outfall pipe, and the Ciba-Geigy closed the plant because they moved someplace else. But there were all kinds of things that came of that. It's actually been chronicled in this amazing book called Toms River that came out earlier this year, I think in March, by Dan Fagan, who teaches down at NYU. Our little piece of it, Greenpeace, is just one chapter, but it tells the whole story of how all kinds of people taking action made a difference there. But this sort of social innovation of the direct nonviolent protest played a role in that. And so anyway, I kind of have been thinking about social innovation, but also from that time realizing that these problems that we were facing that come out the end of the pipe, at the end of the smokestack, are really investment and production decisions. They're business decisions. And eventually, and I did other things in the nonprofit world. I worked in doing sustainable development in Pacific Island countries, and I led a state-led organization in Vermont where we did our own brand of sort of innovative things, I think. But eventually became very interested in seeing how could you change the world from the business side of the fence. And I actually got interested in that because I had on my board of directors in Vermont a whole bunch of entrepreneurs who had been inspired by people like Ben and Jerry's and were running what they hoped would be socially responsible companies. But Jeffrey Hollander, who co-founded Seven Generation, was among them, and I ended up working for him and doing things in the renewable energy industry. And what I was really surprised at, I was surprised at a couple things going over the business world. First was how interesting business is. I had no idea. If I had any idea how interesting business would be, I probably would have done it earlier. This is continuous onslaught of really interesting strategic issues and opportunities to be creative if you're, in the right kind of role. But also how these businesses were populated by people who really, every bit as much as I had been and my colleagues in the nonprofit world had been, were dedicated to trying to change the world. Their view was just that business as the biggest force in the world was also the biggest opportunity to create change, and they wanted to try to harness that to do so. I think that maybe some of them were perhaps naive and underplayed the role that non-government organizations have, or that government itself can have. I wouldn't say that's true today. Government can necessarily be an important part of the solution anytime soon, but you know what I'm saying. There's a lot of different components to making change, and there obviously are really important things that business can be doing, and there are all kinds of people in the business world that are trying to do that. And as I continued in my business life, what I saw was that this extended beyond those companies that were just sort of staking out this socially responsible position. There were lots of people in all kinds of positions throughout the business world that we're kind of taking that seriously. And you know, I'm not trying to say, oh, well, business is going to save the planet and everybody is trying to do the right thing, but there are all kinds of really interesting efforts going on. I think for example, one of the great sort of innovations in sustainability in recent years was actually Walmart saying that they were going to demand that all their suppliers take the carbon out of their supply chain. They realized that the biggest part of their carbon footprint was actually not the lights in their stores and all these other things, but actually what was going on as suppliers were creating and bringing the products to them. Now, sure, you can say, and it's probably true, that it's easier for them to put the responsibility off to others, and that's a whole other issue, and you know, you can look at what they're doing themselves too, and certainly, you know, on other issues, they're not doing what many of us would feel is necessarily the right path, but that was a huge amount of pressure, and they're leading their suppliers, you know, by the thumbnails to create a lot of change that is really, really huge and really just begun. So, again, I'm not trying to do a Walmart push here. I'm just trying to say that there are, you know, this can happen from all kinds of directions, and even businesses that, you know, you wouldn't consider and don't consider themselves to be founded around social responsibility have the opportunity to make huge, huge differences.
Yeah.
So I got off track here, but I hope that was helpful.
No, I thought that was a very important point, and maybe because I really agree with you, I feel it's an important point. Isn't that funny how that works? It's like, yeah, I totally agree. This is important, everybody. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's one of the things that we've talked about here in this program too, is, and I think it's getting to be more true every day, that there's so much potential for change within a lot of within any big corporation. And the reason I asked about timing, you know, too, because I'm curious to know, as someone who's been a part of this movement for a very long time, you have you have a nice history with the movement. And do you feel like it's gaining momentum? What do you think are some roadblocks, or you know, what are some of the obstacles to, you know, and this is kind of vague, but do you kind of understand what I'm saying? Like, from your vantage point, where are we now with some of the issues that you started thinking about a long time ago in the 80s?
Well, you know, on the one hand, you can look out at the great problems facing the world and see that many of them have really gotten worse, and you know, climate change. I mean, we knew about climate change back then, at least those of us who cared to, you know, inform ourselves about it. But you know, we haven't managed to get beyond the path really to doing what's needed. And that, you know, you can see that repeated, you know, in lots of different issues. On the other hand, I think it's really significant that, you know, what we did when I was with Greenpeace 30 years ago is actually not what's needed now. You know, back then it was really important to point out the problem, and you know, to confront it. I think, you know, my own evolution of wanting to move from confrontation to sort of collaboration to solve problems mirrors where we are in you know, in large part in the movement. It doesn't mean there isn't still an important place for confrontation or any of those other things, depending on the issue and, you know, all the rest. But you know, by and large, you've got people engaged in talking about the problem in ways they never did before, and in trying to find solutions in ways they never did before. Now, you know, we still do have to face you know, the facts that it isn't just about playing the same old game, but changing the game. And I don't know whether anybody in class yet seen Andy Leonard's latest video, The Story of Solutions?
No.
Anybody ever seen any of her videos?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You know,
Big fans.
Stuff,
Yeah.
Change. So her latest one just came out this week. And actually, Annie is somebody that I worked with at Greenpeace. She was actually, I hired her, I guess. But she's such an incredible star, and she has it so right, that it's a great, well, it's 10 minutes of just pithy, great stuff. But you know, what she points out is that the game is about more, right? That's what, and we know the rules of the game is to acquire more, and that's how you win. That's what our economy is based on, and we need to change it to not from winning by being more or getting more to winning by doing better, being better. And we need to look at the solutions that we're getting at and to see whether they're truly, old game that are really just leading to more consumption and more problems or changing the game. And a lot of the people that are trying to find solutions aren't there yet. And so that is our big challenge. But, the fact that we are where we are and we recognize that and that we have people actually engaged and dedicated to trying to find solutions is a huge, huge accomplishment. And, I mean, it's easy to look out and see and be pessimistic and to see how seemingly hopeless a lot of things look. But I don't believe that's true, and I'm fond of saying my greatest source of optimism is knowing that I'm usually wrong. So it doesn't look good. It shouldn't stop me or anybody else from believing that we really can, do things that need to be done to kind of, pass it on to the next generation to do their own work to say.
Tell me, anyone, you sort of just answered this question with Annie, but anyone or anything that's really inspiring to you or gives you a lot of hope. I mean, imagine you are privy to, or maybe go to conferences or see speakers or have conversations about things that, when was the last time you left a meeting or a conference and thought, oh, wow, that makes me feel really hopeful, or that could be amazing, that could change the game.
What I find is that every conference I go to, there's something that you think is really kind of amazing, and it may be on a small scale or whatever, but, and those are the things that make going to conferences worthwhile. I mean, it's just you come away with a couple nuggets, a couple pieces of inspiration. And so I don't know if all of these quite qualify, but I was in Philadelphia before last at a sustainability-related industry conference, and some of the things that impressed me there was learning about Microsoft, and I think it was a couple companies are doing it, Disney's among them. They're actually charging a price for carbon. So they've decided they're going to offset all their carbon emissions, including from business travel. And so what they're now doing is they're accounting for the cost of those offsets by charging, people and departments for the cost of those offsets. Now, there's issues with offsets, and it isn't, a whole solution by any stretch, but, it's I think, a revolutionary way to begin to get people thinking about their activities and driving behavior change in ways that didn't exist before. It's beginning to internalize those formerly externalized costs. So I think that can be really huge. The conference was about sort of metrics for sustainability, and there was a lot of conversation about how you actually measure things like social impact. And there's all kinds of innovative ways that people are beginning to do that, so they can actually make the business case to their chief financial officers to be able to continue and expand the work that they're doing. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in that arena that are making these issues, and whether they're working or not, more visible, that can really enable some meaningful progress. So that was my, some of the take-homes from the week before last.
Great. Does anyone have questions? I'll open it to the group. Yes.
You're a little bit faint.
Do you want to maybe come up a little closer? Is this mic? If she got closer to the mic, that would help, right? Okay.
I was wondering if sustainability and environmental responsibility has always been a focus for Aveda, or if it's something that over time, like if there was some kind of turning point or leverage point that changed the game for that, because I work for a beauty product company and sustainability isn't really the focal point. I was wondering if you had any advice about that.
So it's a question about whether it's always been a big thing for the company or for me?
For the company, yes.
Company, yeah. So I've had the opportunity to work for companies that were really founded around that. I worked for a couple of renewable energy companies that were really founded upon that vision. Seventh Generation certainly was, and Aveda was as well. So, those are, relatively unique situations. But I do see a lot of meaningful movement in companies that were not founded upon those principles. And I just mentioned a couple, Microsoft, I think is a good example. You can see, if sustainability is not foundational to a lot of companies the way it is to some of these really values-led companies that were founded around a mission, what they're doing is becoming an extremely significant sort of piece of their work. And the business case for doing that is often important in beginning to get that transition, and this is becoming increasingly well established. And the business case ranges from everything to increased employee engagement, performance, retention as a result of the sort of social responsibility of a company, to reduced risks. There's studies that show companies that have that as a key part of what they do, actually have higher returns over time. I mean, there's a whole lot of ways in which the business case is being established. So that can be really helpful, if you're on the inside trying to figure out how you make change, in the C-suite. But, I would also say that ultimately, we're not going to get to where we need to go unless it's more than that. Unless we understand that, you can't. Why should we separate our values and what makes life meaningful from what we do the majority of our hours in a day? And it's just work, and our businesses are a part of life, and it's not something you can put on a shelf and take off, when you come home at night and do volunteer work or go to church or whatever it is you do that is spiritual. It's got to be integrated into your whole life and into your economic activity. And, I do believe that more and more business leaders can be convinced of that, and that's got to be part of the task ahead too.
That's great. Yes, Josh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's all right. I'm sitting here not even on the microphone. I'm wondering if you could just speak to maybe what you see as some of the key roles or needs in these types of organizations, like the skill sets that people coming out, as somebody who's been working across various disciplines and various industries. What are the things that you think are the skills that are needed for us to come out and actually go and make change, specifically at for-profit corporations?
Well, the truth is, it's needed everywhere in every skill set. I mean, you need people who are thinking about these things across companies, regardless of what they're doing. I mentioned our packaging development team. They've got all kinds of backgrounds, engineers and otherwise, and we need them to be good at what they do in making packaging, but we need them to be aware of and focused and dedicated on, doing it right. And we need people across R&D and product development and marketing and, every other aspect of the company. In terms of sort of direct involvement with social responsibility or sustainability or mission-related work, it can be helpful to have a technical background. I think it's really less, it can be helpful when you're on the job. I think it's helpful in getting a job for somebody that thinks you have a particular technical expertise as opposed to a generalized interest in social responsibility. But I also think that what you guys are doing, sitting in a design school, is really probably, you're going to single out one most essential piece, it's that. This whole onset, the whole development of design thinking is absolutely, in my mind, the key. The idea that you need to deeply understand what the needs are of an increasingly wide range of stakeholders, and how to create meaning level value in whatever it is you're selling as opposed to utility value. I don't know if you guys have seen the book A Whole New Mind. Well, I forget what Daniel's last name is. He wrote, but anything he says, anything that is about utility level value is going to be outsourced or done by automation, or it's not certainly a path for a long lasting job, but it's also not the path for doing what you need to do. Right? It's about when you add real meaning, and I think that the task of figuring out how to tap into people's deeply held aspirations for who they most want to be, who they really feel best about themselves being, is the key. It's not about preaching about climate change, about how we need to save this or save that, or all these external things. If we can figure out how we can make people feel most self-actualized and achieving what they want to be most in life, and that sort of is to be their best higher selves, that's going to be what leads us in this direction. And I think that the skills that are involved in this work of design in its holistic, full sense is really the most critical thing that we need.
Cool. Yeah. Let's try the mic. Let's see.
So I'm aware that Estee Lauder acquired Aveda in the late 90s, and I'm curious how that affects your corporate culture at Aveda. And on a more personal note, if you would ever be interested in moving towards working with Estee Lauder as a whole, because I know not all of their brands have a focus on sustainability or natural products. So Aveda is obviously, working really hard and focusing deeply on this, but is there potential for you to kind of take what you're doing at Aveda, show the rewards of having this focus, and then apply it to other brands under the huge Estee Lauder name?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So, Aveda was sold a long time ago. I think it was sold in '97, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a part of Estee Lauder for a long time, and they recognized that the sort of foundational, that sustainability is foundational to the unique brand value that Aveda provides. There's, frankly, you can go buy a lot of stuff to put in your hair that will suds up and it smells nice. But it's these other things that really create what is different and unique about Aveda and adds that meaning level value to what we do. That creates the story that people want to become part of and can feel good about themselves becoming part of when they walk into a salon and get cared for and buy a product. So they understood that and they kind of let Aveda alone significantly over that period of time. But gradually, and in recent years, are trying to figure out how we can be more integrated, both to take advantage of scale, where that'll allow us to do more than we could, but also in significant parts so that we can provide leadership within the corporation. So Aveda is now sort of regarded as the leader in R&D in what they call natural, organic, green, and sustainable ingredients. Now, NOGs. There may be a measure of how far they have to go that they call it NOGs rather than SONG, which you could also do with those letters. Anyway, that's sort of genuine attempt to try to use it.
Nog sounds like cogs. We like it.
But we are working across, the corporate level of Estee Lauder to really help them move in this direction. And there are actually all kinds of interesting natural ingredients that are being sourced sustainably, being used by other Aveda brands. It's a different kind of thing. When you're talking about a brand like Aveda, whose value is based on this, than it is for the Estee Lauder brand or some of the others, Clinique, where that's not what differentiates them as a brand. And so there's some of what we do that may never be, in their eyes, applicable to what they do in terms of value creation. But there's certainly a whole lot that can be incorporated. And one of the reasons, frankly, why I took the job was it was an opportunity to help make change at that level. I mean, there's a lot of exciting things that I'm really jazzed about that I can do at Aveda. And, it's fun. But where I think I have the opportunity to make some of the biggest change is the extent to which I can partner with people at Estee Lauder Corporate and make change there. And there's a lot of people there that are really interested in that. And what I found so far is that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of good partners that are doing really great things there, and they're interested in doing more. And they've got a long way to go, but I think that they're a very ethical company, the way that they've defined it, and so I'm excited about what we can do there. I don't know whether I'd ever want to go leave Aveda and go work for them. I wouldn't rule it out. As I transitioned between jobs, I certainly looked at positions that were with companies that weren't founded around a mission. And I think if you're in the right setting where there's a sincere enough desire to really do things, the question is, how can you make change? Jeffrey Hollander, who I worked with closely for a bunch of years, was fond of saying, you could spend your whole life working in a company like ours and do all kinds of things, but that would be nowhere near as much change as you could make if you got Walmart to just change 1% of what they do. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So, there's good stuff to be done wherever you are. And, I think it's a matter of digging in and figuring out what that role can be wherever you are.
To measure sustainability and how that's really difficult. With Aveda, but also with Seventh Generation and your past work, what were some of the best ways that you saw going about this process?
There's lots of people that are measuring carbon emissions, and manufacturers love to measure water and waste, and that's relatively straightforward. I'm a big fan of looking at carbon emissions through the supply chain, and looking at a product life cycle as a whole. When you look at any product on the shelf, it's like you're looking at a snapshot. It's like how the moon looks that night, a crescent, but the moon is a whole moon. It's not just that crescent. It goes around in orbits, and I look at it as a whole. And maybe that's not the best analogy, but I think that when you look at deeply through a product, you're going to see all the different ways that you can eliminate problems, get carbon out of it. And when you just look at your own manufacturing process, you're just looking at a really small slice of it. So the development of metrics that look at supply chain sustainability is still very much in process, but that's certainly an area that needs to be more fully developed. Then looking organizationally, the best kinds of metrics are metrics that ladder up to big goals that can really inspire and drive work across a company. And it's hard because so many, when you get down to measuring specific things, you're talking about, specific things that not everybody in the company really relates to. If you're trying to maximize the amount of post-consumer recycled content in your bottles, there's a relatively small group of people who can influence that. So the trick is framing goals and figuring out the variety of metrics that ladder up into them that can allow everybody to kind of feel like they're participating and touching that in some way. So to use that kind of example, you'd want to look for a goal that related more broadly around waste, recyclability, maybe getting petrochemical-based plastics out of the business, that could have facets that everybody can connect with. And then the trick is to really create a dashboard that can be sort of updated in real time so that people can, follow it, and be involved and motivated by the change that's being made. There's some cool things being done with energy that are sort of real-time monitoring of energy use that are really kind of interesting because you can, you can set up one of the I think great frontiers for behavior change is around gamification and social normalization, and so inspiring competition. if you can have different portions of a company or even different companies perhaps competing against each other because they can see how they're doing on energy or in some other metric versus the other team, that's a way to do it. We're going to be launching a system that will engage our employees along these lines around a bunch of different issues, and it's based on sort of points, collecting points and doing actions that you collect points for. I think part of it is the recognition that people just don't change. Those of us who are going to change because we learned about something, we decide we want to reach right, we want to do it. We're already sort of trying to make those changes in our lives. But I think all of us, for much of what goes on and the way we change our behavior, are often more motivated by these other things, by sort of trying to reduce the dissonance we feel between, who we are and who we feel we should be, or remind of that by when you see what somebody else is doing, or any of those things. And so this notion of using these other avenues that have been successful in other arenas like public health, and how do you motivate people to take actions that are good for public health? That's been well studied. And so some of the things that people are experimenting with for sustainability are coming out of those learning streams. I don't know, did that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, great answer. A lot of ideas in there. That dashboard sort of intrigued me. Right? Have you seen such a thing, or any prototypes or?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who've been developing them. Several years ago, when I was a seventh generation, we were talking to vendors who were developing software that could tie into whatever data you had around these key sustainability metrics and translate them into a form that could be available, when an employee walks in and opens up their homepage. It's tricky.
Cool.
The way that's really been happening is by the SAPs and Microsofts and the people who have enterprise management software, where all the data for everything the company does, everything they buy and sell, and all those data are collected. Then one of the things you can attach to it are all the sustainability related issues, and so that's where you can have the most easy access to the real time information that can be used. And again, I think that's an area where they've done a whole lot recently, but it's still early stage stuff, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of improvement in just the next several years.
We actually, I work at Arup right now, which is a big engineering company, and one of our offices, the San Francisco office, actually has real-time energy monitoring at every workstation, so that anybody who works there can look at something and see if they left their computer on too long, how much energy they need.
Cool.
And it's been going on for a year of research, and nobody has changed behavior. Which I think is a really interesting, because it's engineers, it's people whose job it is to figure out how to make people's businesses more efficient, less costly. All of these guys have a monitor at their table, and they've had it for 8 months, 12 months, and their energy usage hasn't changed.
Are they monitoring? You say that it's not been successful yet at making change?
No, everybody who talks about it at the company from that office says it's really cool to know this stuff. They're engineers. They say, I like seeing the data. I like getting insight into the system and understanding, but actually the activation or the behavior change required that the system is sort of begging you to do hasn't happened. And I think the gamification is could be an interesting part of looking at
my bet would be that if what they could see on their monitor was their neighbor's energy use.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. That's what Josh was just saying. He said maybe gamification is the answer to activating it.
No, absolutely. And there've been, there's some of the companies that are on the leading edge of doing energy efficiency. They've been experimenting with that in communities where you these smart meters now. You can do the same thing at home, and what they're finding is the systems that allow you to see sort of what your neighborhood is doing.
Oh, cool.
That's where the real change comes from.
Huh. Very cool. Okay. More?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, back to your discussion of kind of supply chain management and identifying problems by kind of seeing the whole system of a supply chain. I'm wondering if you can give a very specific example of that. So kind of a case study in looking at a whole supply chain for one of your products, identifying a moment of opportunity where maybe you're able to reduce carbon or see a way to make a difference, and then sort of how you go about actually doing that, who the team is that you bring in, if there's a designer involved, who are they and what do they do, and then back to kind of us students, how you see someone who has that design thinking approach helping that very specific problem.
That's a great question. The challenge with that approach is that you're going outside the walls of your company. You're talking about influencing others' behavior. As Josh pointed out, it's hard enough in your own company. And then when you're, how do you have an influence over, your suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers, right? It's not easy. And so, people are trying to figure it out. Now, you can identify these hotspots through these what are called LCAs, the life cycle analyses. And what they basically are there are databases, and one of the issues with this is that the databases are not necessarily that great. They're not based on always good data, but you kind of say, here's the processes and steps involved to bring all the different ingredients to fruition in your product, and here's what we know about the carbon emissions typically from all of those processes, and from the mining or growing of something up through each step, and then you can identify where it is, and so that's relatively easy. There's a lot of still work to be done there, but then the challenge is what do you do about it? What a lot of companies have been doing is asking, just getting into a dialogue with their suppliers and asking what they're doing and what they might be capable of doing about it. So it's really early on. I think probably the best example, I have to say, it's easily accessible for you guys to look at would be Walmart. They had begun to implement this, and the first thing they did it with was looking at, I think, dairy, and maybe they've done it with eggs and other agricultural products, and they're beginning to do it across other lines that they sell. So in looking at dairy, the biggest impacts, looking primarily at carbon or on the farm. And so, if you're Walmart, you actually have influence, right? You're dealing with suppliers who really want to and need to sell to you, and so you can just issue edicts if you want. Or what they actually have done is work with their major suppliers. And again, I want to caveat this by saying, there's all kinds of other issues related to the whole notion of sustainability that one might have about this. But they worked with their major suppliers to figure out how they could change the things that were going on in the actual, milk production that would recapture, sequester carbon, keep it from being emitted. And it gets back, to what the cows are fed and, all of this other stuff that they're playing with. And, again, it's, I think, susceptible to valid charges of those not really being game-changing solutions. It's not necessarily leading to what would be truly sustainable agriculture, although, there are valid questions on the other side of it when you talk about the volume and how do you do it if you don't have large-scale farms. So without getting into that debate any further, they're doing, they actually are doing it. And they outline it, and they've got some good public information available on their website for what they've done on a couple of examples. There's also an industry-wide collaboration called the Sustainability Consortium that has been focused on this and developing this methodologies that will allow a lot of this to happen. And I think they have some examples that you can access through their website as well. In terms of sort of what are the roles for designers in any of this, I mean, you're talking about having to create processes. You're talking about having to create tools. You're talking about stuff that needs to be designed all throughout all of this. I think, again, I'll go back to this notion of the sort of increasing kind of, is the word incursion of design thinking into more and more tasks. I mean, we're talking about what previously been thought of as engineering questions. And I don't think we're going to come up with the real solutions until they become design questions.
All right. Okay, great. Dave. Back
There
to
you
me.
are.
There I am. Thank you so much. This has
Yeah.
been really enlightening. In the dark. It's dark, but it's enlightening. And thank you so much for taking the time. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure, and thanks for having me. Thank you for making it easy and doing the interview.
Yeah. Aren't they good question askers?
Yeah.
Yes.
It was great.
Okay, great.
I'm, if anybody's interested in kind of follow up, let me know. I can kind of figure that out. But, I just love what you guys are doing and what you guys are studying, and can't wait to hear about all the things that you guys go and do with this stuff. I've just been so inspired, in my time in business by having a chance to work with people in school, graduate students, MBA students, recent grads who are, out there just doing incredible things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just give you an example if I can.
Yeah, please.
Hold you for another minute.
Please.
When I was a seventh generation, we ended up kind of developing a close relationship with a woman who when she was in business school, she had an internship in Africa with, I forget what, maybe a UN agency or something like that. And she began to notice that, like all of her female colleagues were like gone from work for a week every month. And she started asking around, and they were out because it was their period, and they didn't have access to feminine care products. Mm-hmm. And she looked into it further, and it was like, all the girls were out of school for a week a month. And she said, how can you? That means that these people are only, they're quarter functional. They're not able to contribute to their society, to themselves, to their families in the way that they need to. And she ended up creating this kind of business. She called it Sustainable. Gosh, I can't remember what it stands for. You can Google it. Mm-hmm. But her business is dedicated to figuring out how pads could be made locally out of locally available materials, and be the sort of core of micro scale businesses. Mm-hmm. Not just in the making, but in the sort of in the selling and the education, components of all that. And she started it in Rwanda, and she's been trying to take it off from there. There's a bunch of technical issues around that and cost issues and stuff, but just one kind of really inspiring example of somebody just kind of taking this approach and doing amazing things. But they're all over the place, so I just really have truly great hope when I think about all of the inspiring things that people are just going out and doing. There's a great piece, Nick, what's his name, in the New York Times, had a piece in the New York Times Magazine a couple of years ago. I think it was called DIY Foreign Policy. And he wrote about a bunch of examples of these people who were out there doing these recent MBA graduates who were doing these business approaches to social innovation. This one that I mentioned was an interesting featured. There's lots of good stuff happening out there. So I wish you all well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.